Officials have warned it will be the deadliest week of the virus pandemic, especially up in New York and the northeastern part of the country. And it appears its impact is being felt in communities with large minority populations. Like New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy touched on this yesterday at the press conference.
You're beginning to get some sense of race of the fatalities. Bless their souls. Not that that's the only metric by which one can draw conclusions, but it is overwhelmingly the case that even in peace times, never mind in times of war, such as the one we're in now, that communities that are usually left behind are further left behind. And it doesn't correlate entirely to communities of color, but invariably that's the reality that we're dealing with. And so the more we, as Judy and team, go through this.
And it's not just locally that we are seeing this trend. Many states are reporting a surge in the number of people of color being infected and dying of coronavirus. So let's look at some more of the other places that are involved here. In Louisiana, officials say African Americans make up 70% of COVID-19 deaths, though the group only totals a little more than 33% of the state's population. And in Michigan, African Americans make up 14% of the population, but they account for 33% of coronavirus cases and 41% of deaths. These are figures from the state health department that were revealed earlier this week.
Okay, I think we've established what the problem is here. We have a little bit of a technical problem too. We have Dr. Jen Caudle, who's here, and also from LaSalle University, Dr. Charles Gallagher. We just can't see Dr. Gallagher yet, but we can see you, Dr. Jen. And well, I guess it seems like there's a medical side of this story and a social side as well. Let's start with your expertise, the medical side. What is the health disparity when it comes to the African American community?
Well, Mike, actually, it's plural, health disparities. I mean, there are many. Just to start out, even before coronavirus and before this pandemic hit, African Americans, we are more likely to have hypertension. We are more likely to, that's high blood pressure, more likely to have diabetes. We have higher death rates from stroke, from heart disease, from asthma, from so many different conditions. We even have a shorter life expectancy than those who are not Black. I mean, honestly, the health disparities really go across the board. It's not just one aspect in health, it's very many. And we also have the highest mortality rate of any racial or ethnic group for all cancers combined and most major cancers. Like I said, it's all conditions. So that is the baseline. That is on a good day. And then you add a pandemic on top of that, and you can see how a community that is compromised in this way from a health standpoint, for many different reasons, by the way, and I know we're going to talk about the reasons why that is, it makes it that much worse.
Okay. Alex?
Well, that's just from the medical perspective. Let's also talk about how we got in this position. I want to ask Professor Gallagher, do you think it's also access to health care and also economic status?
No, I think it's absolutely both of those factors. I don't think many social scientists would be surprised that we're seeing disproportionate death rates among African Americans, people of color in the United States. And I mean, one good example would be who is able to telework, just as we look at it, 1 in 5 Black workers is able to work from home, 1 in 6 Latino workers. The numbers for white-collar managers, which are disproportionately white, the numbers between 60 and 70%. So there's the old line going around, or it's a new line, it's that, social distancing is a form of privilege. If you are a banker, if you're a lawyer, if you're a doctor, if you're an architect, you bunker down in your house and you can limit your exposure to other people, which of course, more exposure, the more likelihood that you're going to basically come down with the pandemic. And, so I think that what it really reflects, I think, are deeply embedded racial inequities that are structural. And the jobs we're talking about, where African Americans, people of color tend to be disproportionately in, are high-risk jobs. So people that flip beds at a hospital, people that are delivering your Amazon products, people that basically find themselves having to go to work, and then they have to, because they have to punch a clock, and they are setting themselves up for greater exposure.
Okay, I do want to mention that Dr. Caudle and Dr. Gallagher cannot hear each other, so we may talk about the same things. Now, Dr. Jen, Dr. Gallagher was talking about structural differences as well, like separation and social distancing has a little bit of a privileged quality to it. Some of these folks they've got to go to work.
Right, absolutely. And I was able to hear Dr. Gallagher, and I do exactly, I agree with him entirely. He mentioned a lot of these sort of essential things when it comes to right now in the social distancing. Mike and Alex and Dr. Gallagher, I wanted to mention some other things that I think also play into sort of this big melting pot of racial disparities in terms of health and what we're seeing. We know that Black people are less likely to be denied testing and treatment when it comes to this. There's socioeconomic disadvantages that are literally across the board that include many of the things that Dr. Gallagher said. And then I also just want to bring up, systemic racism. That is something that is an undercurrent really for everything. And in situations even like a pandemic, it still exists and rears its head. And then finally, just sort of in closing with this, as a physician and as a Black physician, people have not forgotten things like Tuskegee. Even though that's not exactly what's happening right now, I have to be very clear and say that things like the Tuskegee syphilis experiment and sort of a distrust at times of the healthcare system, that's not like over and done in terms of the concerns. So then you put on concerns about a healthcare system or healthcare in general, and also the myths. We've talked about it on Fox 29. There was a myth running around that Black people can't get coronavirus. I spent 2 months debunking that. So, to add to the pot of things, it's multifactorial, not just one thing. And Dr. Gallagher and I think would agree that it's a huge issue, and that's what's playing out in the numbers.
Okay, Alex.
Okay.
And Professor Gallagher, I want you to touch on this as well, because when it comes to some of these myths, either like Dr. Jen Caudle mentioned, that Black people can't get it, or some of the conspiracy theories have been out there about this isn't really a thing. It's just trying to, weed out certain generations and et cetera. Do you think that's also possibly like a coping mechanism, or do you think it's trying to understand, or is it based off the past and what happened at Tuskegee?
Well, I think Dr. Jen is spot on. I think that there is, real distrust with the medical community for historic reasons. But I don't think, I had an experience at my own LA Fitness when I was in a sauna with a number of older African-American men. And this one man was holding court saying that there are no cases of COVID in Africa because of basically your melanin, which I rebuffed this man. I said, this is just not true. And I said, where are you hearing this? And he's hearing these conspiracy theories on this kind of fringe AM websites. And, it's a disservice to every community for people to think that somehow they're immune to this because of their melanin count. And of course, they're not related at all. So, it's, and also just the other things you're talking about. It's like, if you're a worker and you live in a dense area, think about density of a city, right? You're not in a rural area. You almost by necessity have to basically move through populations, right, to get to your job. And in all likelihood, you may be on a bus or taking the L.
Yeah.
So, again, we don't think about it like your car is a luxury. Well, if you don't have a car, you're dependent on public transportation. So these things are very, Dr. Jen is just spot on about these things. These things reflect basically the things that happened in 1850 and 1900 and 1950 are rearing their head once again, right? Because it's systemic racism. Basically, it's playing out at a class level.
Doctors, thank you both. And we'll probably have to talk about this again.
We appreciate your insight.
Of course.
You got it.
Have a good day.
Stay safe. We'll come right back.